So I'm Christiane Peters. I will do the first part of the talk. The second part will be done by my colleague Stefaan van Daele. We're both security architects at IBM in Belgium. And the idea was to bring you near what is enterprise security, what is a security architecture, and then in the area of IoT. So it's also a bit for you an introduction to the day and more other talk. The outline of today's talk is to introduce ourselves, what are we doing at IBM Security, then jump into the topic, what are security challenges in IoT, and then Stefaan will take over and come to the core, what we're actually doing, security architectures. And he explains it for IoT and gives an example. So, in short, who's talking, why IoT is difficult to secure, what it is a security architecture for IoT, and how does it look like in practice as an example. So I want to give you a bit background about IBM just to set the scene. So we're not going to talk about bits and bytes or gates, transistors or anything. We're talking about security for enterprises. IBM, the B stands for business. The target group are setting the IT services and infrastructure for large enterprises as opposed, for example, to the consumer market. So there were times when there was still the ThinkPad, laptops and other things, but IBM moved now towards the enterprise domain. Sectors are almost everything, I would say: financial sector, public sector, manufacturers, transportation, oil and gas, energy, utilities, healthcare, life science. And we're also doing security. And it turns out IBM has grown this part very much over the last year. So security is one of the parts of the concepts we're dealing with in IBM, amongst others like analytics, cloud, mobile, and so forth. And we're now the largest security provider for enterprises. Among other things, so if you would have gone to the webpage of IBM last week, you would have seen IBM does also large events. So since 1990, IBM not only sponsors, but sets up the IT infrastructure for events such as Wimbledon. So what is the challenge about enterprise security? So there were a couple of surveys and also looked into customers, and we found a customer that had 85 security tools from 45 vendors. There's nothing wrong with this in particular, but there's of course a challenge. You need to have the expertise to manage these tools. For reasons of redundancy or so, it makes sense sometimes also to have multiple tools from multiple vendors, but if you have such a case, then is the question, do you have personnel that is trained to deal with all of this? So it turns out, see from the empty chairs on the slides, we have thousands of unfilled security positions worldwide, probably hundreds in Belgium. So CEOs don't really know what to do. They're trying to attract talent. They're looking for you. But they also need to fill this gap, need to fill the knowledge gap, and are looking for help to get security right. Another thing which is mentioned here is also knowledge sharing. It's not like you have a breach or you have a security issue that you go around and say, hey, I need help or so, right? So you go to dedicated partners. So what does it mean when we now talk about security? We're considering what we say the next era of security. Before, when you try to secure a business or enterprise, you started with perimeter controls. People set up firewalls, and they were good. Maybe a vulnerability scanner, that was okay. But nowadays, we move away from this. We say we need to integrate security in all the systems, not just around the organization. And we use intelligence, and we will move, or we're in the process of moving to cognitive technologies, cloud, and also collaborations to address the changes in our IT infrastructure. This comes down then to the new concept we're using at IBM to talk about security. We don't want to talk only about firewalls, network segmentation, segregation, but the idea behind security at an organization, at an enterprise, is now you have to think of it as setting up an immune system. Like in your body, it's not that your skin will protect you from all harms. You have to think threats, evil, illnesses, whatever, will penetrate through the skin eventually. Will they come inside your body, your organization, in this metaphor? How do you then battle this from within? And you need to have a setup where even if you have a breach or you have a penetration, you need to have ways to analyze it, to go with intelligence against it, to protect data and applications, all your endpoints, and attack the threat from within, so fight back and basically solve your security problems on all fronts. So in IBM, of course, this is then translated, these are basically, you can think of it when we come to architectures already as capabilities. We have also products and approaches to all of this. This was, I'm not trying to sell you IBM, but the idea is to show you a bit what is the approach, what is the general picture. The next part is, security challenge IoT. So now I talked about enterprises, but IoT, where is this Internet of Things? Do you know where is it? Well, actually, you can search for it. Who has heard of Shodan? Okay, about quarter, maybe a third. Huh? Yes, of course. But so Shodan is a website. It's a search engine like Google. Yeah? But you go to shodan.io and you can search for, you want to find a certain Siemens installation or so, you can search for dedicated devices and you will find them with a geographic location, you know where they are. Okay, that's handy, that's interesting. You can also find your matching exploit if you want, right? There's also search engines for exploits. Does everyone know what an exploit is? Kind of what hackers use is kind of, it's a way you look for CVEs, so vulnerabilities, exposures, you look for this, you can search them in a database, you find the exploit, which is a small program which lets you exploit a vulnerability and hack yourself into the system. So you don't have to come up with smart things yourself, you can just look for it, find it, download it, and then in combination with Shodan, you could apply it to your target. This is what I think is one of the challenges in IoT, that we have increased visibility, which is good for functionality, but it's also good for hackers. So, going in a bit deeper, what are we talking about in the ecosystem of Internet of Things? So very simplified, I'm thinking of devices, gateways, networks, clouds, solution and applications in various areas. So if you see, well, solution applications, I'm not mentioning solution and applications in this box, but we're mentioning there are the areas where you find these applications. And if you look at this list, you see it matches pretty much the list which I showed you at the beginning, where, enterprise IT is important, where we'll be busy with. And I will not go into a lot of detail, but I will give you a small sneak peek of what you will hear over the day in much more detail about the area of connected vehicles, what are the challenges there. So the challenge is complexity. So it's not that when you started, 120 years ago, people started building cars, it was one manufacturer, they got some steel and other things from one supplier, and then they started building a car. Nowadays, if you take such an example, you will have that 30% of all material is in-house, 70% is coming from manufacturers. So it's complex to You can look at it from just the car perspective, say this is a very complex device, or the car is set up of many complex subsystems and devices and chips and whatever. But then you can also look at the process of making the car. Yeah? Think of the supply chain, how to organize the interaction of the main manufacturer, in this case would be Mercedes, with all the suppliers bringing in all the cars. Yeah? So this is, in general, a challenge, and we haven't even talked about security yet. But you can think of, due to the complexity, there's also a lot of attack vectors, possibilities, so you have to organize everything in a way, and also especially, now I'm talking about the manufacturing process, secure the interaction with everyone. Once the car is manufactured, as we mentioned before, it will be connected, it's part of the Internet of Things. There will be communication with users, with maybe the manufacturer, with other providers, with the insurance company. You will hear more about this in later talks, I think. But the question is, how do you set up a secure system for this? Yeah? This is what Stefaan will talk about. I mentioned already, it's possible to have, there are many attack vectors. You could see this area and there have been already many attacks on the automotive industry. So cars have been hacked. I mean, there's one fun article mentioned on the side, hackers remotely kill a Jeep on the highway with me in it. So not me, Christiane, personally, but this is it's a title of an article on Wired, which I recommend to read, which is slightly scary. Yeah, but this line is supposed to illustrate that there is an interest, there are many attacks going on, and we have to secure it. Who are the threat actors in the field? Well, it starts maybe at researchers, curious, testing security bounds, maybe want some fame, but doing it for non-monetary reasons. However, then you have also competitors. Intellectual property theft is a big problem, right? I mean, Mercedes doesn't want to have that their competition gets the blueprints of their designs. Insiders are often a problem. Yeah? So they are, firewalls don't protect you from insider attacks. Could be also for intellectual property theft, but also revenge. We always talk about the disgruntled employee who wants to take it on their bosses or the company. Then people just simply money. Where's the money? Criminals want to get the money. Yeah, so you can steal cars, you can steal the data around it, you can invade privacy. You can determine habits to create profiles. Maybe some of this is not even, So in this case, I talk about it as malicious. Hacktivists, and of course also nation states, you can think of it. So, oh my God, all these things, and this is just touching the surface. So, this was more like the warm-up. Where I want to go to is, it's time to come from just infrastructure IT. So, IBM used to do just IT for everything. Now, with a security approach, we say, okay, we need to have an information-centric security approach. We need to think of data everywhere. We need to make sure we protect our systems everywhere on all fronts, including new technologies such as and environments, and thinking from the users down to the infrastructure. And how we're going to do this exactly will be the part of Stefaan.
Morning. Thanks, Christiane, for the introduction. As you mentioned, the funny thing is we talk about information security for I don't know how many years, for a while. And when I started with security in IT at that time. The funny thing is we said IT security or information security, but the focus was all the time on the perimeter. There was no focus on information security. I mean, now these days, this is totally different. These days we're really coming back to information security as it means, because the focus is now on protecting the data, because we no longer control the perimeter ourselves. The perimeter comes by service providers. The perimeter is outside of our control. So now we're really seeing an interesting tendency in security, that the focus is where it should be, information security, and not focusing on the best firewalls and things like that, because the perimeter is something that I wouldn't say has vanished, but it's the perimeter is not longer where you hoped it was. And also, if you look at IoT, which is Internet of Things, but it's not new. If from a security point of view, it's not something that's totally different. There are some things we as people doing system integrators, building solutions, will feel a bit uncomfortable, because some of the things you had before are gone. For example, and the very typical example is devices in the IT, they're some far away. They are with limited resourcing capabilities. I know smaller things get more and more computing power. We can do amazing things with small devices, which couldn't do 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So we still see there are some challenges. Those devices are somewhere in the, let's say, in the wild, and people are creative tampering with those devices, or try to tamper with those devices. So while you had in the old days the control of, let's say, physical security, I give a typical example. If you talk to people responsible for an enterprise and organization, they set up also physical security. Cannot walk in, let's say, the NATO building without passing 3 gates where there is a physical security check. You have to show your badge. So you can do things based on physical security perimeters, because you know there is additional controls. In an IT world, those devices are somewhere totally out of your control. So you're losing controls, and you have to replace them by what? You have to replace them by other controls that might not be those what we call preventive controls. In a security, ideal security world would exist only of preventive controls. I don't know if you have ever seen that classification of different types of controls you can apply to manage security. And so if I would have the ideal solution, then I would only apply, between quotes, preventive controls. I would stop every threat beforehand. That's unfortunately not possible. That's a dream. So we have other controls, like detective controls. We try to detect things that are going wrong, because we cannot stop everything from happening, so we try to detect them, and hopefully we can detect them as soon as it happens, ideally before it would happen. That's harder to do, but still we try to do that, to detect things as fast as it happens. So when you're losing controls, because it's a different environment, it's a different world, then you need to look for compensation. You need to do other things still to control of the risk. That's a little bit the introduction of a security architecture. And also architectures, it's no different than building a house. As an architect, you come in a situation, you get rules, you get regulations, you get wishes from the people who wants to build it. They say, we want something, it has to look like this, it has to do this, that's the input, that should be the outcome. So you get given facts, and that's something you have to deal with. In an IT world, the given fact is what are the constraints, the capabilities of the devices you're working with. So that's what we as an architect, we get things for given. It's not much we can change. So that's like in the old days we had commercial software. You have to do what the commercial software could do. You can stretch it to the edge, try to make it work to what you want to do of it, and I've seen interesting failures of products that were stretching the products to an edge where it was no longer working. It could maybe work with 100 users, it didn't work with 1 million users, because you want to do things with it's not meant for. So that's the role of an architect. He has to think about what we call the functional requirements, what it has to produce, but also the non-functional requirements. What's the context it's working, what's the availability, the usability, sustainability, all those things as non-functionals that come up. So where to start? And I quote an IDC report quite recently, because I thought it's somewhere in the middle of that report to say enterprise talking about IoT, they should do an assessment of the environment, documenting the IoT architecture. I'm always glad when other ones say that there is an architecture. So the components and the assets that need protection. So you need somewhere, you have assets. The assets can be, again, within your perimeters, within your control, it can be outside. So you do a threat modeling exercise, and once you know the possible threats, and you make what we call a risk register, what are all the risks exploiting of those threats, then you should place controls. Again, detective controls, preventive, whatever type of control you need, so that you can have a control in one way or another to the possible risks. And of course, you have not do that once. You should do that on a regular basis. And if things are changing, regulations may change, technology may change, new threats may appear. So you might have to adopt the policies. And you see the policies is something that will come back because that's again one of the important inputs for security architecture. But at the end, what we do in information security, and that's independent of its IoT or of IT or OT environment, you have your risk register. So most of the time, I have to stay here. Most of the time, people, colleagues of me, are doing a risk analysis. You look what are the possible threats. You look at. You have these threat catalogs. You have risk registers. You get best practices. You can Google for them. And so you make an inventory of all those risks, and you want to decide what is acceptable for my organization. What's the risk appetite? What's the possible consequence when that risk would be materialized? And in an IoT environment, if I jump to there's other things that come up as well, because something that's more a concern of because the environment you're working is safety. And safety is something different than security. If you drive a car, you would like to be sure that the car can't be hacked. It's for your own safety. There is a physical integrity issue in an IoT world. What's not existing in a typical IT environment. If I walk in let's say, the Ministry of Finance and I sit behind my laptop, there is no physical integrity concern when I work on my workstation. There is still a risk that my data get lost, but there is no physical integrity challenge, let's say. In an IT world, it can be totally different. Again, the car, but other situations. So safety is a special risk. The air companies, airlines, Boeing, Airbus, companies making planes, safety is their first driver. Everything is built around safety. They have new challenges because they're introducing TCP/IP-based technologies, so suddenly they have also IT security challenges, which they didn't have in the beginning when they start building planes. But they used to work around safety, and they still do. That's the first concern. So it's also a type of risk you have to take in account. And from an IT point of view, what we try to do is again, what I mentioned, preventative controls, protective, mitigating controls to get a residual risk. You never get rid of risk. That's also again a dream. You might try to reduce them. You never get rid of them. And you have to bring it to what is called an acceptable level. So in an IT world, it's easy. Acceptable level is how many, it's about the money. Because if you're the corporate information security officer for your organization, you have to spend money on security. That's your responsibility. So you go to your CEO and say, I want to buy, I don't know which, new firewall, new intrusion detection systems. And the CEO will say, okay, what's in for me? Because how much more goods will I sell if I buy this? So there is of course no correlation between the two. It's always the opposite. It's like in insurance. You have to prove that you get a better control of possible risks, and if those risks will be exposed to organization, the damage will be an amount. So you want to bring down the risk that amount, you will lose that amount. So the acceptable level is typically driven in an IT environment by money. In an IoT environment, again, it could be about safety. There is the things that are deployed in an IT environment, you're talking things like fail safe. If it fails, it should fail in a way it doesn't harm people. So that are things that are what's acceptable risk level. And so from an architecture point of view, I took the IBM example, there are others as well. You always start with generic examples. You come with frameworks, you come with templates, but you say something, what we try to do is what we call business-related enterprise architectures. They're very generic. You can apply them in a high level to any type of organization, any type of environment. That are the generic models. Then you go one step down, you go to what we call the technology. So it's still not product specific, let's say, but it's more like capabilities, functionality. What does that provide? These building blocks. In architecture we talk about building blocks. What they have to do provide. And then the next step is, when it's very specific, I make a design, a solution that's using component, a product from provider X, and I integrate it with something else. It has to be protocol X, Y, Z, and whatever. So in architecture, you create what we call, I don't know if people know TOGAF here. Are people familiar with enterprise architectures? No TOGAF? So if you talk about enterprise architectures, they talk about this all the time. You create what's called an architecture continuum. So you define how the organization should be organized. You have generic models, you get these technology models, and you get specified architectures. And that's changing all the time. That's why it's called the continuum. The job is never done. And that's why it's interesting to be sometimes an architect. The moment you have built something and put it in production, like we call it, we always talk about building something. We build something, we put it in production. Even in DevOps, when it's about days, you're still building something and it's put in production. It's still changing all the time. And so, in the old days, I got enough gray hair to talk about the old days. It was the waterfall principle, and at times it was even months you could build something. Now, these days, things were going faster, but still, the role is still there. You need still someone who understands what the business is going through, what are the compliance, what are the regulations, what are possible risks, and you have to integrate things you get from cloud providers, things you're building yourself, things that are coming from your suppliers. So that's what you have to make the puzzles, the pieces of the puzzle match. That's what an architect tries to do. And so for the people lacking the semantics of architectures, I don't know, sometimes people get lost. What is an enterprise architecture? How does it relate to IT governance? So I don't know how many people have experience in large organizations, have do an internship of work there, but somewhere there is a governance board, there should be, in a large organization, small as you won't find. They say, what are the standards within the organization? We will deploy all workstations with Windows 10, for example. That would be a very simple example of an IT governance decision. So you want to reduce cost by standardization, or you have to say, we get a development team, developers are always special guys, they need large machines with a lot of memory, solid state disks, they get Macs with a large screens, or they get 2 screens, or whatever, they get 3 laptops, whatever it needs. So you have to find some standards. This is interesting because, of course, now you get organizations say you can bring your own device. That's always interesting, that everyone can bring his own device, because it's handy. It's maybe cost interesting, but also it might be some flexibility. You won't find that easily in a bank environment. You might find that, let's say, in a marketing company, where it's less strict, let's say, than in a bank world. But then you have to again think about, if you're responsible for security, what are my mitigating controls? Bring your own device. I might decide that I use thermal emulation. I give everyone, to name some companies, Citrix capability, and everything that's enterprise related they do on a virtual workstation and no longer on their own device. So I don't have to care about if the device is compromised and what fancy software they've installed on it. Still today, and that might frighten some people, I know companies where you cannot surf. You don't get access to the internet because you don't need it to perform your job. So why should I give employees access to the internet? They don't need it to perform their job. And then how they've got a smartphone with a 4G subscription, so if they need to do something, they will do it on their smartphone. But I'm responsible for an organization. I do something mission critical things. They don't need internet access. But And if you want to combine both worlds, you give them two PCs. One which is for the mission critical exercise, and one is where they can read emails and get access to the internet. So military organizations are like that. They get 3 different networks with data diodes in between. So data, only one way of the direction. So all that to say that IT governance is say, how do I standardize IT within my organization? Physical security, I mentioned it before. It has connections. Sometimes you rely on physical security. Sometimes you can't rely on physical security. Corporate risk management. There's more than IT in risk management. Banks, again, are the champions. Well, I don't know if the champions after 2008, but they're supposed to be the champions in risk management. So they're talking all the time about financial risks because they're taking everyday decisions about billions and taking some risks there. But any organization has a risk manager, someone who is responsible for what are the type of risks we can take as an organization, how much capabilities do we have, and what if the risk gets materialized. Can we do a financial buffer if it's a finance organization? But that's the corporate risk officer. And that's not always the same person. It might be the same person as the security responsible person, but large organizations have a different team managing risk, and IT risk is just one of the risks an organization has. And then enterprise architecture, that's how you realize your governance. And security architectures are in between. It's not there. It's not because it's security. It's the center of the world, but it gets input from everywhere, and it has to provide feedback to all the other. And so, an enterprise security architecture again is general. Security architectures are specific instances. For example, I'm deploying a new ERP solution that will do my invoicing and the billing. So I make a specific security architecture part of the overall solution. With IBM, we created something that's called a generic model, and we call it a blueprint. So it's not an architecture, it's just before. That's the building blocks, just to give you an idea. If I'm talking about security building blocks, how that looks like. And so the middle layer, we call it the foundational security management layer. It's a security service catalog. If you look at the open group, I don't know if people are familiar with the open group. The open group is responsible for some standards like Unix, to name one. That's a famous one, but also the TOGAF, but others as well. So they're also developing now a security service catalog. And so security service sounds a bit strange, but on the other hand, it comes back from the idea, if you look, ITIL is service management. If, again, I need to provide, as an IT department, still organizations have an IT department, again, that might change in the future, but I see evolution there as well, but I provide services to my business units. I've got a manufacturing department, I've got a finance department, I need to provide service to them. They need IT to do their job. So there is service level agreements, or you have service level objectives. You want to provide availability of your, again, finance system 24 hours by 24 hours, 7 days by 7, for example. And so they have a typical, in this world, an IT service catalog. You're going to do exactly the same with security. So instead of thinking about and have risks and controls, that's the only thing I think you can do the opposite, to say, I will provide them capabilities they can do, they build their solution. So I can provide authentication capabilities. I can provide data protection capabilities. So I create again a catalog of building blocks. How do I deploy security within my organization? I provide it in an other strange way, the URL, if you want to read it, it's 120 pages, I think, not that long. So an example of such a service catalog, again at a high level, is I took identity and access management, one of my favorite topics as an architect. So you get different types of capabilities you need to provide in identity and access management, and that's not different in an IoT world. Let's give first an example with employees. If a new employee starts an organization, you give him an account so he can log on to, I don't know, the Active Directory world, and he gets access to his email, he gets access to a SharePoint where all the documents are that he needs for his project. So there is an attestation, new employee, you have to give him an ID. That ID has a life cycle. All those capabilities you need to create, you need to provide, and you need to design them. You say, how do I manage them? So that's an example of a service catalog. I need to take care of the time. But also, devices as an ID. So if I have a smart grid and I've got smart meters connecting to a backend, so how do I identify those smart meters? How do I manage the life cycle of those IDs? I know when it all started, the discussions 10 years ago or longer, so how do you manage the certificates? If you would use certificates, then you have to refresh them because they get an expiration date. That's interesting if you get millions of them. So that's something that was in a discussion I recall that was going on that time. So again, identities have a life cycle. They may come, they may go. How do you know who is allowed to access? How you know that's a device that should be connecting to your world or not connecting to your world? And then that's the picture I use if I explain a security architect to someone, because it's a dynamic thing. As I mentioned before, we talk about risk. You do the analysis, you make your inventory. This is what can happen to my world, to my solution. And out of that inventory, I create a list of policies. Of course, that not only comes from risk. There could be two other arrows. There is, of course, the regulations. Again, I might do different things when I'm a telco, because a telco has some obligations. They need to store records of communication during a certain period. If I'm a healthcare provider, again, there is regulation that say what I have to do, how I have to handle. So there is a risk input, there is a compliance. I need to comply to regulations. And also, of course, I don't forget my people from the business areas. They want to say, my solution has to do this. I want to create a self-driving car. So that's my requirement. So you get your requirements from typical three inputs: risk, business, regulations. As responsible for security within an organization, I would start putting that in policies and guidelines and procedures. So because people won't start reading the law texts or the regulations themselves, so you have to translate that in something that's specific for your organization. You start defining policies. You say, these are the policies within my organization. Those policies are the compilation of those three different inputs. Get a long list of security policies. Then you have to make them concrete. You have to make them, what does it mean within my organization? For identity and access management, for data security, application security. So you try to define, to translate, let's say, those policies into something that has to be done. And that the two arrows we put there on purpose is there is something that has to be done maybe to your IT environment, but also to the people. It's not we don't have yet the chip in our head that we can be programmed, that we have to behave, but still a lot of security concerns are people behavior. How do I make sure that they do not expose sensitive data by posting it on whatever social media? So it's by security training, awareness training, do it in every year. Within IBM, every year we have to go to this training. It's a funny thing because it's a quiz at the end. If I don't succeed with 80%, I think, my manager gets an email and I have to redo it again. So it's not to bore people, it's just because you have to remind them that the world is changing. You get possible threats and we all get exposed to funny emails trying to invite us to make a loan from someone in Nigeria that has a legacy suddenly that is for you. I mean, it's amazing. I recall, I don't name the company. The company was a victim of an attack. So they hired the company, it was not us, but it doesn't matter. They say, we have to do something about the knowledge of the people. We have to make them aware of the possible risks because we saw what has happened. Phishing email, classic example, someone clicked on the phishing email. So they did an awareness training and then they start sending themselves phishing emails. Yeah? So to see if how effective was the awareness training. Still, 75% of the people clicked on that email. So there was still some work to do. Even after an awareness training of all those employees, it was a large organization, 10,000 employees, they still found that 75% was teased enough to click on the link that they get. So just to say, and it's a very stupid example because phishing emails, they get sophisticated, but it still shows that people, and I don't call them the weakest link, I don't like to say people weakest link, but you have to make them aware, you make them, should empower them to make risk-based decisions. It sounds complicated, but at least you say, if you're doing this, would you do this for yourself? Because you're now doing it with company data, you do it with patient data, whatever. So most of the people are aware of the confidentiality or the possible risk of what they do for the job, but sometimes they're not aware because the other side, let's call them that way, they're quite creative, they're quite inventive how they should approach those things, so people get misled by the other side. So I've defined my solutions. I have to deploy that in an IT environment, which again, if you talked to me 10 years ago, was quite easy. It was a data center, a large data center, a lot of racks filled with computers. Everything is under my control. Now it's somewhere. It's somewhere at Google. It's somewhere at Azure. It's maybe in Amazon. I don't know where it sometimes is. Maybe I know, maybe I don't know, depending. It might be still in my data center. It might be on a mobile device. And so I have to make decisions. So where does that data, should it be or should it not be? Can I put security controls on it? And if I can't, what's my compensating control? Do I have to do analytics or what happened with my data to know that I'm still in control? So you get a lot of information from that IT environment, and so you get events, you get information and events, and then you do the analytics on that. What's what we call security information event management. The role of that solution is collect information, evidence from everywhere in IT, from what's in your organization and the IT used by your organization. Again, the IT used by organization can come within your organization. If it's a military world, it's really still within the concrete walls. If it's a commercial organization, there will be cloud providers as well. And of course, I put external intelligence because you don't know everything yourself. Unless you're some three-letter agency, you have to get your information from other companies as well. So you using research organizations, threat research like in IBM we have X-Force. I don't know if people ever heard about X-Force. You Google on X-Force, it's our research department. Those are the guys looking at all the interesting things that's happening in IT and IoT. Chris Poulin, he's one of the security architects of the X-Force. His favorite topic is connected car. You have to look for him. You will see some articles. So external intelligence, that means you add to what you know from within your organization to what's happening outside the world. For example, X-Force as a web crawler in Germany, it's in Kassel. It crawls the internet just like Google do, but we do a different purpose. We do categorization of all the URLs that we found, all the websites we find. We classify them. Is it a banking website? Is it a gambling website? So what's the purpose of the website? And also, more interesting, is that website is known to host malware. It can be a very standardized website. I mean, a regular website you would go to, like, let's say, the public broadcasting company of your country, but their website is maybe being attacked, so they're without they knowing it. So you might find malware on websites that you would be safe, between quotes, to visit. So that's something we try to do with a web crawler. That's external intelligence. You combine those events from external, internal, and then what we try to detect anomalies. Anomalies in is this known what's happening here? That can be anything. Anti-malware will say that they found malware on a workstation, still happens. So old school, but still effective sometimes. So you get security events, you get a team working on security events. If they think it's a security incident, they will start a process to handle the incident, mitigate the risks, mitigate the consequences of that incident, restore back to normal as soon as possible, and learn from it. So what can we do to avoid in the future? And that's where it goes up again. So that's where to close a look. From everything that's happening, the analytics I'm doing and all these events will tell me, are my policies effective? Is the technology that I deployed effective? Am I compliant? That's not maybe my concern, but that's probably the concern of a lot of other people in my organization. So that evidence will show that I have everything under control, or maybe I don't have it under control. So that's something that will tell the risk manager. So that's the closing loop. So that's what the security architecture should think about. There's one thing I haven't talked about yet. So security architecture, don't think always as deploying anti-malware, setting up firewalls, having intrusion detection system, anti-tampering solutions. It's also about processes. The arrow from architecture to security operations. I also have to think, how do I set up security operations? What type of people do I need? What should I do? What's the process they have to execute? If I have an incident management process, what that process looks like, who should I reach out in the case of security? All that is part of a security architecture. So, similar picture to make it more concrete. So you get on the left side the different domains where you define security. Then, as an architect, what we get conceptual frameworks or conceptual, that might derive from that into the conceptual architecture. A logical architecture, still at the building blocks type of thing, and then the physical architecture, of course, and where you start filling host names. You say, I've got an intrusion detection system, I will buy from this supplier, intrusion detection system, and my primary focus is HTTP traffic going to my websites, or it might be an intrusion detection system that looks at everything from that going into the network, not only HTTP, but also maybe FTP, maybe the DNS requests coming in and out, and so on. So as an architect, I'm concerned doing that architecture. Again, these arrows to say that we have to do something in IT world. Maybe we might have to do something with the processes and the actors on the different locations where there are. You see on the top, the education awareness, there are roles. And that's not always in what we call a B2E context, business to employees. It might be also B2C context, banks trying to educate their customers how they should act on those phishing mails. Try to learn them, if possible. How do you say that it's an email coming from the bank and not an email from someone trying to mislead you? So it's happening everywhere. And the security operations, some more details. So the services on the right side there in that rectangle is what the security services are. So a security service is, I have got a control, intrusion detection system. I'm not done once it's deployed in my IT world, because then I need to operate it, I need to make updates to that, changing rules, I get events from it. So maybe there is a vulnerability even in that device, so you have to look at the CVE publications. I find out I need to do something on that device, so I have to install fixes or fix packs on that solution. So there's a lot of things they have to do once you deploy it. You might buy the best firewall of the world, you still have to set up a perimeter defense. But if you don't maintain the rules, if you set one rule that allows everything in and out, it doesn't help you to have the best firewall. So there is a lot of focus on operations. If it's not within your organization, then you would ask that from your providers. So how do you operate your environment? Prove me that you're using process and procedures, that you do it in a way. There are standards for that, so that you can be sure that your provider acts in a way that you would do yourself, or you would expect to do yourself. Talking about conceptual frameworks, so if you look at, this is a model that's based in the blueprint, and it's also come from the open group. It's called the Open Group Enterprise Security Architecture, ESA. They say you get policy enforcement points. We get security policies. That policy has to be enforced somewhere. It might be at a laptop, it might be at a server in a data center, it might be at a device in a car, it might be on a smart meter. But I've got something that I need to enforce. I want to get control on something. That security controls get enforced by policy enforcement points. And it might be anywhere. And sometimes there will be preventive controls. They will stop you from doing things if they can. There might be detective controls. Just detect that something is happening and forwards the event again. You see the arrow going left to a SIEM solution, so detecting something, and they will try to act. There's a research paper from the Maverick group. They published something like killing all your security controls. It was a quite provocative title. What they say is that people were relying too much on only trying to stopping people from doing things. So it was the preventive control. Say, get rid of your security controls. Of course, they didn't meant it, but they want to get the attention by publishing the research paper. They say there should be more focus on the analytics, the monitoring, because you cannot prevent everything. And the Maverick group said we should have more focus on monitoring and detecting things that are happening rather than trying to stop everything from happening. Okay? That's the balance you have to take in the security world. If you could, you will try to stop people from doing things. That's the preventive. If you develop a smart meter, you will do anything you can to avoid tampering with that smart meter. But if you can't stop them, you will try to detect it as soon as you can. So there is always the balance you need to do. If you now go to IoT, because that's what's the subject of today, of course, is IBM published some generic IoT architecture models, and we've put the link here. So if you look at on the left side, there are the users, of course. This is a generic example. This you could apply to any IoT context. For example, imagine that you're a supplier, a manufacturer of engines, and you want to do proactive maintenance on those engines so they don't fail, they don't stop the production of the companies. Your customers are using those engines. So you have a device that monitors that engine and that reports back on how many times it has run, maybe some sensors it has a lot of sensors maybe that control that engine. So you have a device, a sensor, or you have a lot of sensors that will create information. You have to get it in a secure way to a solution which we call here now in the middle a cloud solution. It's a combination of cloud and IoT. That's, I think, very realistic. So it uses that gateway to those sensors will connect to a gateway. That gateway has more empowering power capabilities, resource capabilities, so that sets a secure communication with that cloud solution. You get a lot of data there. You maybe have a device registry. How many engines did I sold? Where are they around the world? How do they connect? How do I know it's an engine that I've sold that connects and didn't someone tamper through that? And so you get a registry. You have to make a registration procedure, an onboarding procedure. You got APIs. Interestingly, we're going to the API economy. So the success of a lot of solutions is because not of the functionality, but also the fact that they made this functionality available as APIs. Still, you want to have security, so you create an API catalog. How do you protect? How do you ensure that the right persons, the right systems are connecting and using those APIs? And then you probably have a lot of analytics and data manipulation, and then the real organization, the manufacturing company, would get information about those engines around the world, and so the application will say, okay, this engine has worked for, I don't know, 10,000 of hours, it needs some proactive maintenance, so I avoid that it would fail before. So from security point of view, there are different places, of course. It's, if I, as an architect, look at it, yes. So, of course, this IP gateway is the most interesting one. That's the perimeter, if you call it. So I got all these sensors, devices somewhere that are connected to something physically. That will connect to the cloud provider, if I would do the cloud provider, which stores devices in a registry. So it has a management. Management means for me processes. How do I register device? How making sure that the device is end of life because I decommissioned it, that no longer can connect. Same to, you get the equivalent with employees. You should be amazed how many organizations still have active accounts from people that left the organization for years. In IoT world, you will the same. You will have similar challenges. So how do you know that an engine that is decommissioned, but that ID that's still valid is not used or abused between codes? So I store data. So So I need data protection also here. I got analytics going that use that data. So APIs, as I said, the APIs, you need security to ensure that there is a secure use of your APIs. So there's probably a certificate of signing or signatures in the APIs to be sure that it's a trusted party. And something about risks, and I just want to mention because while I was reading this ITC article, they say, again, the smart metering example, when smart meter and smart grid came up, the biggest fear was the hackers would use that to bring down the whole grid. The fear was we have these IT capabilities in an OT environment, and one of the biggest fears they had is hackers will bring down the whole grid. If they look now 10 years later, what happened? Still the good old thing, fraud. So the example that is, they found that people from smart meter companies or utility companies were paying themselves, let them pay, so they tampered with the meters. So they, so that was fraud was still the biggest risk they got exposed to. So they were focusing on that hackers could not bring the smart grid. They get still catched by simple fraud like they was. The other thing is, and that's about me as an end user. So I would ask how many people would today like to drive with a self-driving car? How many people would be feeling confident being in a self-driving car? 3 of them, okay. Just this another example, students, they found out that the company was charging them still while the electricity was shut off. So the interesting that smart meter said, oh, you're using electricity, and they said, yeah, but we shut down the breakers, so there's no electricity used. So they found out by putting a meter in themselves, the company was charging them 2.5 times the reality. So they lost confidence. So what's the worst thing as you want to sell a solution to your consumers in the consumer market if you lose confidence? If you have now, I don't know, Tesla, how much accidents can afford and say it's not their problem. I don't think it's their problem, but I mean, remember the Toyota case? I don't know if people remember that, Toyota with the brakes. Suddenly the figures of Toyota in the United States dropped because someone was claiming, one person was claiming they had a problem with the brakes. And I think it was true, but again, they had to recall thousands of cars. It was a huge cost for Toyota. But if you lose confidence in your consumers, then you get a challenge. So it's a risk that's not an IT risk, but it's an business risk, losing confidence because of something that you did not work. Recall the example that Christiane showed, the Mercedes car. I counted them, 48 suppliers. 48 suppliers that you need to manage. So today, not all of them, of course, have IT of TCP/IP of communication capabilities. That will be more and more. More and more, you'll find that there are sensors in the wheels, but there are sensors everywhere, and those sensors become more and more connected between quotes. So all those suppliers need to manage. So an architecture, it's not only about technology, it's about people and processes. And so if you have 48 suppliers, that you need to build a trust with those suppliers. You need to be sure that those suppliers create sensors, create devices that have a certain level of security and safety if it's an IT world. And I give an example of the open group here. It's called the Open Trusted Technology Provided Standard, OTTPS. You should read about it. And that says, how do you do an accreditation of your suppliers? So if I have 48 suppliers, how do I go them to the process, do the accreditation to be sure that the suppliers provide you devices that are not tampered? Especially in the cybersecurity world, it leaves the manufacturing company, they created those devices, they arrive at your organization, you have to be sure they've been created and manufactured in a safe way, and they have not been tampered in between. So there is a whole, and it is something that exists very well in the military world. The military world has this attestation process, a very limited process. Anything you want to put from an IT within the military world, they have to go through this accreditation process. In IoT, you'll have to do something similar. So organizations like Boeing and NASA are applying this standard to and force their supplier to follow certain procedures to be sure that they get the right things, let's say, or the devices in a secure way. So some examples for the time that's left. Was it 10:30 that we had, or 10:15? Whatever. People will stop me if it's needed. So first thing I took from the healthcare is, and that's also from the blueprint, an example. Let's assume we get physicians somewhere. In the old days they worked for one hospital. These days they're working for more than a hospital, or they get their private mini hospital between brackets. So they've got devices, and while in the old days it was on paper, they had it in their hands. Now it's an electronic record of the patient, and they can access it remotely. That's interesting. And if you look now, I don't go for the risk, you do the risk analysis, I will go for the policies. So we did a small inventory of what are all the possible policies I need to take in account. This is a very simple example. I've got an health information system database, and we've got people remotely who wants to access it. But you see there are already quite a long list of policies that they have to take in account, because there's probably saying something about compliance to regulations. There's people saying what you have to do for business continuity. It has a high availability solution. You know about security, we talk about integrity, confidentiality, and availability. Some people tend to forget availability is part of security, but it's part of it. So large organizations typically do this classification. They get 1, 2, 3 for integrity, 1, 2, 3 confidentiality, 1, 2, 3 for availability. So you get a 3, 3, 3 environment. That means high confidential, integrity is very important, and it has to be high available. So you have to put a lot of controls from that. You got something about saying, how do you classify assets? And organizations should say, this type of data I consider confidential or sensitive, or it has a value for me, so I need to protect that data. You got policies saying how you have to do the operations. You get your chain of trust with your partners, because you delegate something to partners, so you have the mutual trust to set up. I will do this if you do this. That's could be materialized by a mutual SSL certificate channel. Let's say we exchange certificates, and I will validate that you get a proof that you are who you're pretending to be, and I'll do the same. Maybe the mobile devices. You get some policies saying how those mobile devices should be managed. You get mobile device management. Again, usable in a B2E context, where it's the employees with their devices or the company-owned devices. That's not usable in a consumer market, but still. I mean, the bank won't manage your smartphone if you do online banking, but they might have other controls to mitigate that. Yeah? So you got a lot of policies that says, before I start even designing things, it's all imposed as me as an architect, or you maybe if you would go to that role, what should I take in account before it starts? And if those policies don't exist, you will have to create them, or you have to make decisions there. So you start, that's why you all like to do there, and it's not that well. Sorry for that, the rectangles have disappeared from the projections here, but so you create your building blocks of capabilities. You see what I need to do. I've got different zones in the typical, if it's my own perimeter, independing of that's now in your organization or by a cloud service provider. You will have a data zone. Where is the data? You got the application zone. Where is the logic? You might have still DMZs, perimeters, between inside and the outside world. You got your the internet, which is what we call the untrust world. By the way, there is also the zero trust approach. If you get the zero trust approach, I don't know if people are familiar with that one, then I have only one rectangle. I trust nothing. And the zero trust means I consider everything as dangerous as other things. So I don't make any difference between if that device is within my data center behind concrete walls or it's a smartphone. That's a zero trust. That means I apply the same security controls to any device, any IT equipment. Sometimes organizations apply that. I know there was a university in the United States would remove their firewalls. They applied that in a they say we don't need the firewalls. For us, the internet or the campus network of the university, it's all the same. It's as malicious possible. So they said, why do we need firewalls? It's a cost. So but that means that you have to move your security controls closer to the servers, the data, and so on. That's it's an interesting approach. I don't know, there are many other organizations followed the example, but I thought it was quite interesting. The use of those zones, again, from a security point of view, you want to have a similar level of trust of those devices in that zone. That means you apply the same level of security controls to the devices. If I get a security management zone, where I put, for example, my user registry, maybe my key store, HNASSM, or if I got something else where I store my keys, or maybe I want it to in a separate network. Maybe I want to have a stricter control of who is accessing that network for which purpose. A lot of organizations who have still their own data centers, one of the primary concerns is privileged users. Privileged users, root on Linux or Unix, administrator on Windows systems, they are the god, they can do anything almost, they are privileged users, the DBA on a database. So you can't stop them from doing things, again, no much preventive controls you can apply, you have to look at detective controls. Are those privileged users behaving, what type of commands are they doing? Is someone not abusing a privileged account? That's what people with malicious intents try to do, get access to a privileged account and do things with it. So the management zone, that means probably there's a lot of security controls. In the DMZ, you get specific security controls. In the data zone, so every zone, you get a specific set of controls and a specific level of trust. Some organizations, they don't see it in zones, they do it that level of trust at server level. That means they change the trust level depending on the type of communication. They have a server communicates with another server, that point-to-point session, that is a certain level of trust. They apply security controls to that level of trust. That means it's dynamic. It's the best thing to do. It's quite expensive and challenging to do. But I know organizations that use that approach. They said we don't use zones. We apply the zones at server level. We apply the security controls depending on the type of communication we have. And then security controls are applied. So you need to do your policy enforcement at different places depending on the type of security control that you need to enforce. Again, if you would go to the IoT architecture, then you would apply specific controls here, there, and so on. So the controls, depending on where they are, what they need to do, and what is possible. You get limited possibilities probably on that sensor, if at all. Probably the best thing you can get is that it gets the integrity of the data out, so it's not changed when it's communicating with the gateway. It might be confidential, it might need to be confidential. Sometimes it has to be encrypted, so it's not, someone cannot read it. Sometimes the integrity is more important, so most important that the value is not changed during the transport. So depending on the type of security control, again, to get rid of some risks, you will have different actions, different policy enforcement points. And so, if we put it on red, it always looks dangerous if you put red. The security controls you have to apply would, in an IoT, would something like that. So you have an application firewall in your DMZ with intrusion detection system. My eyes can't read it, sorry. So you get remote access, antivirus, anti-malware solutions. So you get different controls in DMZ. You get some of them in the outside world, but maybe none on the sensor again. And maybe you cannot apply. You have to buy that sensor. It provides you the parameters you want to monitor, but maybe it has very limited security controls, and maybe you cannot apply any control. That's, by the way, if you talk about before the Internet of Things, you get the SCADA systems. one of the challenges in manufacturing companies. They get these PLC systems. Sometimes they're connected to a computer that runs a specific software to manage the production environment. Typically, you may not allow to touch them. You cannot even install a patch on it because it's no longer compliant with the company, the manufacturing policies. That means today you will find some still manufacturing companies still have Windows 2000 running. Yeah? While we all know that was, from a hacker point of view, let's say the dream, because it has the longest list of vulnerabilities because it's so old. But still you cannot apply any security patch on it, because if you would do that, then it might fail, or it might no longer be supported by your manufacturer, so it brings down your production system. Other example, I know from colleagues they did some, if you do some sniffing, you try to scanning of the network to find out what ports are used. You can't do that in a SCADA environment, you might bring down the production system. Some of those computers just crashes if you do port scanning. So that's interesting, you're not changing things, you just try to find out on which port the component has listening ports, and you just bring down the production system by scanning it. So you have to do other security controls. You get limited things you can do, so you have to find mitigating controls, the fact that you get devices there you cannot do from a security responsibility or not. Again, you might come away with intrusion detection systems that you put in front of them. You might have a security information event management system with specific monitors in the intrusion detections on SCADA protocols and so on. You can think about what are the possible mitigation actions I can do to yet have a control on those environments. OT environments are always challenging from an IT security point of view. And on the back end, of course, you see things like audit capabilities. You will be, if you go to an enterprise, you will find that audit always creates kind of diversity within an organization. If they say there is an audit going on, whatever the purpose of the audit is, but you got security audits, you got compliance with regulations, anything. But it's a typical thing you have to do if you implement security solutions. You have also to provide reporting capabilities, dashboarding to people, to the auditors that will pass by. If it's an internal audit or external audit, you have to provide the evidence about how effective your security controls are. You might have identity stores, do identity and access management, key and certificate management, and so on and so on. Just to show that to you, even before you go into the details of implementing, you have to think what type of security controls do we need, where do I apply them, and what are the capabilities. That's the example. And so if you compare between an IoT architecture versus an IT architecture, is that you, if you look in a traditional company, let's say take a bank, it's a bad example, but still banks are my most dear customers sometimes. So they've got workstations, they got devices, they got data centers with, let's say, application servers, a lot of databases. They might have still mainframes that where the transactions are going on. So, and those organizations still also need something like a security information management system, and that's a pure detective control. What I mean is, in an IT environment today, a lot of security is realized through detective controls, not through preventive controls, also through preventive controls. And that's an environment where they get full control of the workstations, they get full control of the servers, they get end-to-end control of everything that's happening. Yeah? And still, they need to realize security by also doing detective controls. So now switching to the IoT world, Internet of Things, so how much do you have under control? So the focus on detective controls will be even more important. You have to do much more analytics to detect anomalies than in a traditional IT world. Because in IT world, you still get the possibility to do a lot of your preventive controls yourself, while in the IT world, you have to need to rely much more on detective controls as a system integrator, as a solution provider. And also what I mentioned in the beginning is there is a difference between security and safety. In an IT world, you have to think much more about the safety of the persons, the consumers using the solution, while, as I said, if you sit behind your laptop, safety might be not the first concern of the security officer of your organization. It will be a concern, don't get me wrong here, but it's the thing is that in an IoT world, you have something like fail-safe. I don't think fail-safe exists on your laptop when you're running Windows 10 or Mac, because my Mac this morning crashed as well. So fail-safe, I lost my documents. From that point of view, it was not a very safe failure from my document point of view. Also, as I said, you got lost of your physical security controls. In the traditional IT world, you still can rely. You can rely that your data center is not the open market where everyone can walk in. Probably get some good physical access control to your data center. That's control you lose in an IoT environment. And also what I mentioned is confidence versus trust. In a commercial world, there are trust relationships. If you talk to the consumer world, the end users of IoT things, there is also confidence. Confidence is the belief that things will happen like you have it in your mind. And the trust is the reliability of the other partner. So it's two similar worlds, but it's a difference from a commercial point of view. So that's, and I want to stop here. Just a point for people who can't sleep at night, some additional reading. We got a securityintelligence.com website with a lot of stuff, and we got a dedicated Internet of Things where you can find articles about what could go wrong and how could you avoid things going wrong. Any questions so early in the morning? You've been very quiet. That's a good or a bad sign. No questions, concerns, remarks. Yeah. Yeah, I think they're still there, the university. But it was there was a lengthy article. I have to look it back. There was a security officer explaining why he was doing that. And I think, to be honest, for him, and one of the reasons was he said, I will focus putting all the controls on my servers. That was before the cloud era, so he had the data center, and he said, I will the perimeter on each server. So he decided that every server has an intrusion detection system, a firewall, and so on and so on. So I don't know if it's more cost effective. We can argue if that's more cost effective. What I saw in traditional discussions of IT security, that people believed once they have the perimeter right, they didn't have to do anything anymore. So I think from that point of view, it's not a bad idea to say, forget there is a firewall. It's not because there is something like perimeter defense, perimeter controls, that everything is safe between brackets in the inside world. That's no longer true. We learned all that in the hard way, or by reading. Hope by reading, not by the hard way. So organizations learn that in the hard way. Still, I think it's, from an efficiency point of view, it's not bad to have a firewall that at least the very simple things are stopped at the perimeter defense. It won't stop those things that are maybe cause a nightmare, but still the very obvious things are stopped there. Yeah? So it's, I think it makes sense. I would not saying that you don't need a firewall, but anyhow, I'm not selling firewalls. So but okay, it's interesting to say. I think it's also more of what do I need to get my data safe. I said today, and that's what I like very much, there's a tendency to think now about information security, meaning how do I keep my information that's has value to me, how keep that secure. And traditionally, as I said, the focus was on the perimeter. They thought they had a firewall, maybe they got an intrusion detection system, and they were done. It was good enough, and we learned that they lost a lot of data, the organizations. So yeah, I don't know what happened to them, but I presume they're still a university. I have to look up the name. I knew the name, but I tried to recall it while I was saying it, but I can't find the name. I'll look it up. Other questions, yeah?
I realize we talked a lot on compliance and governance and things like that.
Yeah.
In terms of the IoT, are you doing anything technical, like bringing new technical security measures into IBM?
You mean from compliance point of view? So
Not compliance point of view, but maybe protocols. I don't know. Are you looking at something
So from IBM point of view, I think if you look what we're doing in IoT, we are more at the backend side. So we are not creating sensors. We're not making devices. I don't know, and look at Christiane, but I'm not aware that we are, for example, developing protocols that typically are used in the IoT world. You've got this dedicated type of protocols, like you've got in SCADA, you get similar things in the IoT world. So I don't think we're very active on that. We have been very active in the example I gave on the OTTPS. That's not a protocol, that's a process. How do I do the accreditation of suppliers, of devices, what the device might be? That might be a sensor, that might be a smart meter. So we're more active at the enterprise side than the point solutions, but we do integrations. I mean, if you look at our IoT, we provide the analytics. So how do I know that the devices registrations that are devices that are supposed to be the devices I'm managing? So we're more active, let's say, providing capabilities to organizations to set up the backend part of the IoT, let's say not at the device world. That's where we're active.
To add to that, I saw you put standards like COBIT. Is
Yeah.
it applicable in the IoT, or is it a little different?
That's a good question. I never thought about it. So COBIT, it's about the process maturity. Yeah. So I think it's applicable. I think it's applicable everywhere, COBIT. If you look at COBIT, now the latest version 5 something, it was 4.1, the previous version, I think, if I remember well. I think the first paragraph of the book says something like, don't try to achieve maturity level 5 on all the 130 controls, you will go bankrupt. They mean that you have to make, again, driven by the risk, the process maturity, because it's about 130 processes, and if I recall correctly, I think 80 something have to do something with security, and 50 have nothing to do with security in COBIT. So if you say, for my organization, I need process maturity level 5, the best maturity I can have, for those 130 control, that's probably a lot of money wasted, because you have to look from a risk point of view. What do I try to get control on? Yeah, Christiane.
Also we mentioned ISO 27, so this is for IT environment,
Yeah.
it goes for OT especially. So there exists, for example, for energy and utilities, there exists another ISO standard, ISO 27019, which then tells you what you're not allowed to use from the other ISO standards. It says all these controls don't make sense in the OT world, because please don't change passwords frequently.
Yeah, for example.
In an OT
Yeah.
environment. Also, we can debate that whether
Yeah.
it makes sense in an IT environment.
Yeah.
But it's kind of lot of. I would say COVID is difficult to apply in the OT environment. On a general scale, it fits on the process level, but there are more dedicated standards you should apply in especially OT environment.
Yeah, I think it's a generic approach from process maturity level. It's not, and again, you got the NIST cybersecurity framework. That's, I don't know if that really applies to IoT. Again, it's a very generic standard. If you look at it, it's more applicable to SCADA environments, I think, than IoT. If there's a difference, but the cybersecurity framework of the NIST is, I don't know how many controls they come up, but it's again. It's a best practice. A lot of those standards are best practices. The ISO standard is a best practice. That's how you should apply a best practice. And best practice is an input for your architecture. It might be mandated. It might be something you deliberate choice. So some things are mandated. Sometimes the regulators say, you're in healthcare, you have to do this. If you're a telco, you have to do this. If you're a utility company, you have to do this. That's what the regulators are enforcing you. So some of them you pick and choose. Sometimes you have no choice. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Mm. Mm. I think it goes, and I could be wrong here, but I think it goes back to risk management. If I would look, what's the risk, what's if the risk gets materialized? What are the consequences of that? So, yeah, that's a more a business decision sometimes. In case of safety, there is no. I think the choice is easy made. Safety goes first. You have a data center. I've got something that will has gas to stop fire in case of a data center, but I have to be sure that people left the data center before I trigger that fire solution. So there has to be always safety first principle, I think. Like in, I was with Eurocontrol. Eurocontrol, they do the control of the airplanes, and so from the pilot association was talking, and so their concern is always safety. The first thing I think about is safety, and you need IT security to reach safety sometimes, but it should indeed not be conflicting. It's not. You shouldn't like to have on your dashboard of your car that you have to log in using a password to get something control of your car. That would be a stupid example, but I mean that should not stop you. Example again, the air traffic controllers. That are systems that don't have a password for evidence reasons. They rely on physical security because you don't want that an air traffic controller has to go for coffee, go back, and he has to log on to his system to say to the plane what it should do. There is no password or access control on those systems. But you have to get mitigating control. So I think that safety comes first, and it's by the risk analysis you will do. Christiane, I don't know if you got any.
So there, most of the time, the most important thing is integrity, but if it comes to data, that is the only confidentiality, the privacy also comes in. It's difficult to decide.
Yeah, and privacy is even another direction. So.
We have new regulations coming up.
Yeah. On which level do you do it? On application level, on the metadata again, so we always say, or we tend to say, that there's no privacy without IT security. Because if you don't apply access control to data, then how can you guarantee the privacy of the personal identifiable information within that database? So you need IT security to be able to guarantee or to provide privacy to the people. Of course, it's not because you get security in place that you get privacy. It's a different requirement. But let's say a good IT security is needed before you can provide privacy where it's needed. It's now consumer data or employee data or whatever data you want to keep private. That's independent of that. Any more questions? Then I want to thank you for your time. I hope it was interesting.